Good morning, party people, and welcome to office hours. It's a Monday morning. The Suez Canal is free. Oh my goodness. Although, at the same time, I'm also kind of disappointed because this has been an interesting thing to just kind of keep watch on and keep hitting F5 to just go look and see what's going on over with the whole canal thing. From having done a little sailing myself and being around boats a lot, and I subscribe to a lot of shipping industry newsletters, it's been really interesting to see uh, how little blame has been put out there. Like, there hasn't really been that much autopsy type stuff about what's broken with it. OG Surgeon, good morning, Netherlands. Joachim, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly over on YouTube. Good morning. Gustav says good morning. Um, yeah, I'm amazed by how little finger pointing there's been. Just like that, everybody's pulling together to try to figure out how they're going to fix it. Payam, make sure to read the info up there on how to post your questions. That's where we'll be taking our questions up there. But it's kind of like the hug ops principles, where when something goes wrong in your SQL Server, in your systems administration, whatever, you want to get people much more pulling together, trying to fix the problem, and then autopsy will come later. And you don't want to point the blame on stuff. You just want to figure out what went wrong and how we can fix it to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But some inside baseball stuff with the shipping piece. At least when you're going through a canal like that, you actually have to bring a local pilot on board. It's not the ship's captain that screwed it up. It is either something happened with the weather, or it was related to the local captain, or it can be the canal itself, like the canal didn't get dredged the way it was supposed to get dredged. Um, Jude says the ship is partially free. The stern is still stuck. If I remember right, just from looking around, it was the bow that was stuck right now, not the stern. Like that they pulled the stern away from the other side. But either way, we're both right. It's like half of the ship has been pulled away. But as long as you can at least get ships through, that's the big important piece there. So, for those of you who are at your first time in one of my office hours, what you do is post a question over at the top right there at pullgab.com/room/Brento. I'm trying something new today. I am only going to answer questions that get to at least 3 upvotes. Because something that I noticed during one of the other streams recently, I was like, ooh, I kept going and answered every question with only 1 upvote, and they didn't. And just the when the question posts itself, it automatically gets 1 upvote. And it wasn't necessarily a good question, and it was things that maybe people weren't really all that interested in. So I'm only going to focus on ones that hit at least 3 upvotes. And it looks like we've got our first one already, so I will go ahead and put that up on the screen. Gustav says, my friend. Oh, I love what you did there. That was very good. That was good. Gustav says, my friend has a SQL Server 2019 Standard Edition with CDC enabled on all tables. All tables 2,300. Holy smokes. So let me stop for a second and just talk a little bit just about my philosophies of about CDC. Things like change data capture and change tracking make sense when you have a fairly limited amount of tables that you want to capture. But when you get up into the space of thousands, I worry about a couple of things. One is, can our ETL process keep up pulling stuff out of the database as quickly as possible? Like, is the overhead of CDC going to be so high trying to pull 2,300 different tables and sync them all over the place? Two, I worry about just the sheer volume of stuff we're trying to track. This is the kind of thing where it's usually better to use something like a high water mark. What I mean by a high water mark is, in the ETL process, you keep track of a last synced date. And then on every table, you have a last updated date time column that you keep up to date with a trigger. So that way, every time someone does an insert or update, that last update date is automatically changed. Now, this doesn't fix the problem of deletes. There's still additional work that you have to do if you want to track which rows got deleted, but at least this is a way lower overhead way than trying to have SQL Server keep and maintain a history of changes. It's probably separate from the question that you're asking, but I'd be a bad consultant if I didn't at least mention that when we're talking about like 23. Says, I do log backups hourly, but my log file grows out of whack. I see when they're backed up. CDC does not allow to have the log be truncated. Okay, so here's the next part of this, is I wouldn't do log backups every hour. I would do log backups every minute. Now, let me explain about that. People think that log backups every minute is going to be a huge amount of overhead, that they're going to have just this spectacular overhead from constantly doing log backups. But it's the exact opposite. You want to nibble off the changes as frequently as you can, rather than waiting until once on the hour and then trying to pull down a huge amount of changes all at once. Your users will feel that slow down. Let me put it in terms of numbers. Imagine for a second, and I'm just making these. Imagine for a second that your database generated 1 gig of transaction logs every minute. Would you rather back up every minute and just nibble off those 1 gigs one at a time? Or would you rather wait an entire hour and then try to pull 60 gigs of data all down at once? That once an hour thing is going to really suck pretty bad. So just as a side note, I would also think about turning down your log backup frequency. Now, of course, it's going to generate a whole lot more transaction log backups, but you're not really going to sit through the GUI and restore one log file at a time. You're going to use a script like SP Database Restore. SP Database Restore is an open source thing that's inside of our first responder kit, where you can just point it at a folder and it'll automatically restore the most recent full, the most recent diff, and all of the transaction logs since. Now, the thing is, that's still not going to fix your problem, because if people aren't polling CDC to see what changed, I can see how you'd end up with, or CDC's in the middle of writing something, I can see how the log might not be available to be cleared. What I would say is, back to my first original answer of, is CDC really right for you? My hunch is it's not. Like, I have a hunch that with 2,300 tables and people not pulling down their changes very often, you probably have bigger problems, and I'd step back and ask architecturally. The other thing I would say, though, is people often say, my log file grows a huge amount. It's normal to expect that your log file will grow to 25% of the database's size or larger. Like, sometimes that's just the cost of doing business when people type begin tran, lock their workstation, and then go home for the weekend. And you don't want the database to stop. You want to go ahead and grow out the log file to at least, say, 25% of the size of the database, so that you have room for emergencies like this. If it's getting up and above 25%, then that's where I might start to ask questions about, hey, is CDC really a great solution for us? Good question, though. Very good. Next up, we have Alex. Alex says, which configuration parameters must I change when installing SQL Server? It's a great question, Alex, and to answer it, I've written an entire guide, and it's absolutely for free. So if you go over here to open up a web browser and go to monster.com, find yourself a new job. If you go to Brent Ozar, Gustav says his log files are growing to twice the size of the data files. Yeah, then that totally is a problem. So if you go over here to brentozar.com, and then up here at the top, there's a scripts link. So if you go click on scripts right up at the top, then I've got my first responder kit over here that you can go and download. That includes my SQL Server setup checklist. So that's brentozar.com, and then click scripts up at the top. Now, I should say, I haven't updated that setup checklist in like 3, 4, 5 years. The basics are all still the same. I just want to mention that just so that you know, and if something looks like it's mentioning SQL Server 2008, 2012, 2014, 2016, these things haven't changed at all, but you nailed it when you said max memory size. There are several others that you have to configure. Cost threshold for parallelism, max degrees of parallelism, your backup compression settings, all kinds of other good stuff. And also, too, I'm going to ask you, Alex, if you've seen any good checklists on what to do with Postgres, because you mentioned that you're coming from Postgres. If you've seen any good setup checklists for Postgres, post those over in the chat because I spend about 50% of my time in Postgres these days. I don't have to do a lot of setup because I use Amazon Aurora, which kind of manages a lot of it for you. But I'm always curious to learn more. I love seeing how other databases work. All right, we got Belfast and Nigeria in the house. Good to see. Let's see, next up, James asks, I'm upgrading from SQL Server 2014. Would you choose 2017 or 2019? I've seen you in blog posts write poorly on 2019. That's a great question. To answer it, let's go look at my blog. Pushing my blog twice already here. If I go over and look at, if I search for Brent Ozar, which SQL Server version, Sammy, hooray for insomnia. If you search for Brent Ozar, which SQL Server version, I've got a blog post about that exact topic. Now I'm going to kind of sum it up for you a little bit here. SQL Server 2019 is great if you need features that are inside of it, and if you can only install it once and you need to leave it there for a really long period of time. You're coming from SQL Server 2014, and right now it is, checking my watch, the year 2021. That tells me that you may not upgrade more than like once or every 5 or 6 or 7 years. In that case, I would probably consider 2019 just to give yourself the longest support runway, just the longest period of time where you don't have to go and touch that SQL Server. Now, however, having said that, in this post, the version that I suggest instead is really 2017 for most people because it's baked a little bit more. There have been less surprise bugs inside of there. For example, right now there's a bug in SQL Server 2019 where if your modification queries like updates go parallel, you can have a problem where they either run forever, like literally forever, they'll never stop, or they can give you incorrect query results. So Microsoft has been working on that bug. They shipped a broken fix for it in the last cumulative update. It's been a known issue for a couple of years. Paul White recently blogged about it. So if you want to stay away from issues like that, I would probably be more likely to stay with SQL Server 2017 just because it's a little bit more baked. 2019 had some really cool and interesting features, which also have bugs. So that's where I get a little bit nervous on that one. All right, let's see what we have next. Next up, Alex says, let's say the end user, oh, my camera died. Oh, what's going on here? My camera died and it has a little icon on it for battery. All right, well, let's go get the battery. Hold on a second here. Toes are in the black hole. I was wondering what was going on with that thing. I saw a little icon over in the corner and I'm like, oh, what's up with that? Let's see here. Let's plug the battery in. And then that. Plug in, charge. Now we'll click over and click on the camera start button and let's see what happens. Off and on. Okay, there you go. Let's see if you pop back up right side up. And there you go. All right, next up. So Alex says, let's say the end user has problems, like, say, Brent with his camera on a Monday morning plugged into Outlet. He says, neither the SQL Server nor the application show any issues, but the problem persists. How do you go about diagnosing that? I'll tell you a story. So normally when clients hire me for stuff, I have them send me diagnostic data in about the SQL Server. But every now and then someone waves a large enough bundle of money in front of me. They go, here, we need you on a plane right now. I will go get on a plane and go do the needful without actually having data about the server. And that's what happened this time. I had a client who said, here, we're going to give you a big, large barrel of money. Get on a plane right now and come to, it was some Midwestern state like Mississippi or said, get on a plane right now. Okay, you got it. Clear the schedule. I'll take that money. Off we go. I show up at the office. And they're like, here, as you can see on this chart here, our SQL server's having problems with wait times. And I'm like, okay, but that's not what that graph actually shows, but I'll humor you for a second. They said, whenever we run a query, whenever we're trying to do our application work, this graph goes up and then it comes back down. And the application's being really slow. I said, well, okay, let me show you something. While that thing was jumping up and down, I said, watch this. I said, DBCC check DB. And all of a sudden the graph went boom and went all the way up to the moon because the SQL Server had a lot of headroom left. It wasn't actually doing anything. The SQL Server, battery exhausted. All right, so we're going to go with the front. We're going to go with this one over here because the battery died on that camera again. All of a sudden the chart goes boom when I run check DB because the SQL Server had a whole lot more horsepower throughput left in it. I said, the thing that you think is slow has nothing to do with that. That little chart going up and down has nothing to do with what your user experience is. Show me the application. Show me the application where people are having problems. And so they show me the application, and I open up Task Manager, and I look at CPU, and it's banging against 100% CPU on that particular desktop, where that desktop just didn't have enough CPU power to do what the application needed to do. I said, can you do me a favor? Can you install that application over here on this much faster computer with a whole lot more CPU cores, faster CPU cores, and let's see how it works. And then immediately, all of a sudden, the experience was totally different, was able to absolutely fly. DBA can often stand for default blame acceptor, where people will make us take the blame for anything, no matter what that thing looks like. Often it's on you to go do root cause analysis. This is actually one of the things that I loved the most about the database job. In the database job, I got the opportunity to interact with the network team, the C# developers, everybody who is out there, the firewall guys. Everybody who is out there, and then understand how all the different parts of the application worked in order to do cause analysis, because everybody just always wants to blame the database. So the answer to your question is you have to keep learning, learn additional stuff so that you can get to the root cause of whatever it is. Next up, Payam asks, Brent, is it possible to see what fills the log files? A while ago, I faced a server that its log files were growing so fast, and I wondered if it was possible to see what filled the log and what caused that. Oh, that's a fantastic question. You would think, with a name like log file, you would think that that would be easy to open up the log and read the file. Fortunately, that is not how SQL works. The log file is designed for SQL Server to quickly write what it needs to do and then keep moving on. It is not designed to be read by any kind of, say, third-party programs. So you can buy third-party tools that will read the transaction log file. They're spectacularly slow. They can take minutes to hours on real production-sized workloads. And they're not something that you want to just play around with randomly out of curiosity. Okay, next up, let's see here. I'm going to move things around just a little bit on my browser here so that I can show you this. I'll switch over to here. Oh, and we'll do this. We'll do polgab.com/room/Brento. And then, so just so that now we can see, oh, and I can probably make that larger too. That's fantastic. Let's also, I'm going to switch the screen around for just a second here. Where is the polgab? Copy that out, copy, and then paste that over here. Reference. Why aren't you? Transform. Ah, there you are. Okay, cool. Go over here. There we go. Oh, that's kind of nice. I can work with that. And then I will hide my monitor. Oh, that's kind of spiffy too. Oh, that works out pretty well. It's dark. Not sure I like that, but it's good. Oh, you know what? I can get rid of my green screen behind. No, we'll stick with this. All right, so we'll start. There's Payam's question. Now, what do we got next? Let's switch over here and move this so that I can change things around. And let's see here. Over in chat, G Surgeon said, I asked a question in polgab, but I can't find it. Yep, well, that's not so good. Oh, G Surgeon, someone flagged it as dangerous. That's why. So I'll go ahead and restore that just so that it shows up in the list again. and move these around, and I'll take the next highest voted one. All right, next up, Carl says, SQL Reports, what's your general approach to report databases? Users expect instant updates. Click save on the website. The record appears instantly in the report, which I appear is unreasonable. So I think of it as like any other server or any other kind of database. You get 3 dials that you can tune for performance. You get 3 dials that you can tune back and forth. One is the query design dial. One is the table and index dial, like how your indexes are designed in order to make your reports go fast. And sometimes you have to refactor your table. And then the third one is the hardware and licensing dial. So I'll just present it to users and I'll say, okay, so I got these 3 dials here, the query design dial, the index design or index dial, and the hardware dial. Which dial would you like to turn in order to make it go faster? And in the case of report queries, what often happens to people, I can't change my reports. They're built with Power BI. It has power in the name, so they must already have the power built in. Okay, yeah, great, all right. So would you like to change the tables and indexes, or would you like to invest more in hardware? Well, indexes are free, right? You can just go off and do that. I'll tune the indexes to within an inch of their lives. And in the case of reports, that's an indexed view can pre-bake things like aggregations and groupings. So you can hit update and the answers will appear instantly inside the report. Now there's a cost for that because the more indexes that you add, the slower inserts, updates, and deletes will go, which can cause a problem when we start to talk about high concurrency websites, in which case we may just have to turn that hardware design dial up. But that gives you at least the answer to those 3 choices that I have inside there. Payam asked another question. Payam, I already answered that, so I'm going to go ahead and flag that. Let's not go ahead and ask the same question again. Next up, G Surgeon says, my company does not use schemas. Oops, click the wrong icon. There we go. Go ahead. My company does not use schemas in our databases. Should we still reference our objects and stored procedures with a 2-part name like dbo.object name? I'm going to give you the book answer, then I'll give you the real world answer. The book answer is that yes, you should fully prefix them. Even though they're all in DBO, you should fully prefix them because it will lead to faster query compilation because SQL Server won't have to look at your default schema and then see if the object is there first. SQL Server just knows exactly which schema that it's in. This can also lead to gotchas around execution plans not being cached the same way if people have different default schemas. Now, that's the book answer. Have I ever hit a point in my life where that's made a difference in terms of performance tuning? No, I just feel like I have to give you the book answer because usually when I see people who don't even bother putting in DBO, usually we have other problems too where they've missed some of the basics. If they can't even be relied on to get that right, I start to get a little bit worried about other things that they've done. Kind of like the broken windows philosophy. Policing, for a while there was a philosophy, and there may still be, I don't keep up with police strategies, but for a while with policing there was a strategy that you fix every broken window in a neighborhood. As soon as you started seeing broken windows, that the neighborhood was probably going to go downhill and go into bad shape. Folks, make sure to pay attention up there and where it says ask a question or vote. I won't be taking questions directly on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook. Next up, Alex says, I want to implement multi-tenant architecture, 1 database per client. Besides encryption, what else do you recommend paying attention to? Oh, this is such a good question. I've actually written a blog about this. So if you Google for Brentos multi-tenant databases, I've got a blog that gives you the pros and cons of 1 database with everybody in it versus every client in their database. One of the things that sucks about 1 database per client is high availability and disaster recovery is way harder. It's easy to protect one large database. It sucks to protect 1,000 or 10,000 small databases. Log shipping is harder, backups are harder, availability groups and database mirroring are outright impossible, VSS snapshots don't work. So the thing that I would just generally start with asking you expect to have 1,000 or more databases within the next couple of years? If you do, I would highly recommend going down the Azure SQL DB route just because they take care of the HA and DR for you. It's not necessarily guaranteed. The other way to look at it is that your wallet takes care of high availability and disaster recovery. It's more expensive, but it just isn't easily doable with on-premises SQL Server. When you talk about software as a service, environments where clients often have an expectation that downtime shouldn't last more than, say, an hour, and you shouldn't have more than an hour's worth of loss. Next up, Andrew asks, let's see here, how do you create friendship and alignment with other teams without being taken advantage of? Coffee. Build them, bring them. Well, it's a lot harder in the coronavirus age. I work in a small BI team in a siloed invest organization. Getting friendly with other teams becomes them trying to force a great idea for a new initiative on us. I have no idea. I'm going to tell you as a consultant how I have to create friendship and alignment. When people come to me, I'm kind of like an emergency room surgeon days for SQL. When people come to me, they are covered in blood. You know, there's all body parts are hanging off of them. Their SQL Server performance is terrible. There's smoke coming out the side. And I usually don't have to create a lot of friendship and alignment because everybody understands that there's an emergency and they have to get things fixed as quickly as possible. But back in the days when I was a database administrator, I would say, okay, what do you need from me? What is it that I can do in order to make your job easier? Now, given that you want something from me, here's my to-do list. Here are the things that I have to do for other teams. What can you take off my plate so that I can work on your stuff? How can I get it so that we can both help each other? And if they looked at my list and they went, oh my God, I can't take anything off of that. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to put you down here at the bottom. But because you just came in, if you want me to move you up in this list, I'm afraid you're going to have to figure out how to pull some of these other things off. That sounds kind of terrible, but you would be really surprised how often teams can actually pull things out of your queue and go, oh, let me go talk to Annabelle. That particular request isn't that important. Let me go talk to Phil and reprioritize that. Or get you money, or not for you, but to bring in consultants or contractors to fix things. Next up, Matthias says, are there SQL Server benchmarks out there with a database showing results to compare different SQL servers, like PCMark? Yes, TPC. So if you search for TPC benchmarks, it's like Transaction Processing Council or something like that, TPC. Boy, there aren't a lot of them. And it isn't something that you can go submit your own benchmarks. It's something that they're heavily vetted by Microsoft. They're vetted by the database vendors, the hardware vendors. Because otherwise, anybody could go put up a crappy benchmark that showed a database in a bad light. That's actually against the end user licensing agreement. If you read that end user licensing agreement, let's be honest, you have never read that end user licensing. But if you've ever read that thing that you agreed to, the problem is that the licensing agreement specifically says you're not allowed to post public benchmarks without Microsoft's approval. So that's kind of the bummer about that. It's called the DeWitt Clause, and Oracle originally started it because Dr. David DeWitt, posted benchmarks about Oracle in an unflattering light and flattered SQL Server. And so Oracle's like, all right, you want to play that game? You can never run benchmarks on our software again without our approval. And I kind of get it because people can do bad benchmarks. Jim says, how bad do you miss Helmet? So I have 2 cars left over in California, remember, my Helmet and the car that I still have yet to name, my blue Jaguar XKRS. And I kind of wanted to name that Jezza after Jeremy Clarkson. But Erica can't stand that name, so I'm like, okay, I gotta go pick another name. But I do totally miss both of those. What I have here, let's see if I can show it over here. What I have here is I have my 2021 Land Rover Defender that's sitting outside right now as we speak, getting buffeted by snow. What I really want is I want to go get a 2021 Land Rover Defender with the new V8 engine, the 555 horsepower engine MFB. The new, I forget what if they call it the SVR or what kind of special edition or whatever, but 550 horsepower V8 engine. But the problem, it only comes in problems. It only comes in black, white, and the other color, gray, I think. Black, white, and gray. I don't really like any of those colors. So we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up replacing that Land Rover with a new 90, with a new two-door. You talk about first world problems. But we're trying to figure out. So we don't know if we're coming back to the U.S. in mid-July. Our teleworker visa expires in mid-July. There's talk amongst the Iceland government that they're going to extend it for another 6 months, and if they do, we'll stay here another 6 months. That would be the point where I would go replace that Defender. Or if we're coming back home, but I'm so excited. Also, Doug DeMuro has my Jaguar XKRS, so I keep hitting refresh on his channel to see when he posts the video of it. I can't wait to go see how it looks. I was so excited when you're exactly right about the white getting lost in the snow. But here's the bigger problem. You're on the highway and you're driving a white SUV. People can't see you until it's too late. And Erica and I both jokingly said that we would do like day glow yellow if we could, just to make it more obvious where we were at. We actually want green, Pangea green. I would point to the green screen behind me, but you can't see it. Erica Gabriel, I agree with you too. Red is probably the best. I love red cars, but my wife has said I'm never allowed to get another red car because I kept getting like lipstick red cars because I'm red-green colorblind. And so what's vibrant to me is like way over the top to the rest of y'all. So kind of funny how that works. Next up, Philip says, I have a multiple terabyte database that we're looking at moving to new hardware and considering the cloud at the same time. Have you had any experiments with Hyperscale versus on-premises? Yes. If you search on my blog for Hyperscale, I am a huge, raving fan of the architecture. The storage right now is a cold potato. The storage has a limitation that is slower than a USB thumb drive. I don't have a USB thumb drive around here on my desktop. The storage is slower than a USB thumb drive. So that makes it specifically the write speeds. The ingestion speeds are pretty bad. So that makes it tough for me when something's called Hyperscale. If you want to get a lot of data into it, good luck. It's something where it's going to take a really long time to get a lot of data into it. When you say multiple terabytes, try getting it in there as a proof of concept and watch to see how it happens when you do your daily workloads, like doing inserts. Next up, Gabriel says, in a SQL Server 2017 database, I'm doing a backup twice a day, log backups every 15. I got the log file about the size of the database and is almost empty. Is there something I can do or check to solve, or is it normal? What I'll normally tell people is to go shrink it down to 25% of the database and leave it. So if you're in 25% of the database and then it starts growing again, then you can start to ask questions. What you could do is set up a SQL agent job to run tools like SPBlitz or SP who is active, log those to a table every couple of minutes. Then that way you'll see which long-running transactions are open and burning up a good chunk of the log file. So now granted, that's more reactive than proactive. You have to go set the job up, but that's what I would honestly do to start because it's so easy. Go shrink the database down, the log file down to 25% of the database's size, then set up that BlitzWho or SP who active agent job, writing to table every minute, every 2 minutes, and only keep like 24 hours or 36 hours worth of data in there. Then that way, when the thing grows, you can look back to see what was running at the time and what caused it. Next up, Space asks, good morning, Brent. For high availability groups, what's your preferred solution or opinion, using disk majority or file share majority? So disk majority is when you have a failover clustered, when you have two or more instances sharing the two or more nodes in the cluster sharing the same storage. File majority is when they don't see the same storage, which is more typically like always on availability groups or cross data center clusters. So there's the short answer. If they all see the same storage, disk majority. If they don't see the same storage, file majority. Next up, Ricardo asks, how should I play with it with a new customer? Kind of concerned about you there. Who knowingly used 2014 dev for production beyond sending an email advising him that's not okay? Oh, that's a great question. Oh, I run into this all the time with clients. All the time, sister. It's like 2-3 times a year. I'll run into it with clients. Here's the thing I always say. Look, I'm not the licensing. I don't really care what you use for production. But I would be a bad person if I didn't at least inform you that your production license would cost this much. Would you like help reducing your licensing exposure? I'm not going to report you to anybody, but right now you're using, say, €250,000 worth of licensing. Would you like help getting that down so that in the next year, when you go to buy these things that you're using, you can adjust down to a size? Clients will usually say yes. We want to be legal. We would love to pay. We just can't pay €250,000 right now. Can you help us get that number down to a more manageable number? Then it's more work for you to help tune them with it and get them into a safe place. And then the next year they can go buy the licenses or whatever timeline works out best for them. If they say no, we're not interested in help reducing our licenses, what I would suggest you do is go find another client. If someone is willing to screw Microsoft, they will screw you. They just haven't figured out how to do it yet. You don't want to stick around to wait for them to figure out how to screw you, because it's probably going to involve piling up a large amount of debt to you, the invoices they just simply don't pay, and then they go find another consultant. Also why it's also helpful when you work with a company, if you come in and they're just replaced another consultant with you, is to go ask, why wasn't the last consulting relationship successful, and what can I do to avoid those same challenges? I want to make sure that our relationship is a success. And if they're real dodgy about it and you start to get hints that they don't actually pay their bills, that's your sign to look for the door marked exit. Next up, Scott says, how should one go about job searches for a database dev role where companies generically refer to it as DBA and many other tasks? Oh, man. Whenever companies make a job description, what it seems like they do is they make a laundry list of everything they would love for that person to do. So what I'll do when I go and interact with a company who's doing, hey, we would love a consulting engagement that has these 43 things. I'm like, okay, let's pick the 3 things that are most important to you. That if I do these, I'm going to be considered a success. If I fail at these 3, I'm going to be considered a failure. What are like your top 3 things that the person needs every single day? And that will help them refocus. And they're like, oh, you know that part about fixing Sybase replication? That's really only like every 6 months. And I can be like, okay, great. So you don't mind if I Google when I'm trying to fix your Sybase replication, because I have no idea how the sample that works. Galambunga says, do you miss your morning coffee place? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. You know what I really miss? And this is going to sound funny. I miss walking. I miss walking around to nearby restaurants and coffee shops. I miss being able to just, my normal routine would be mornings. I would wake up, I'd hop in the shower around like 3-4 a.m. I go and hop in the shower. I'll come out, I'll do emails and catch up till like 5-6 in the morning. Something's open, one of the coffee shops or breakfast places. I'll go then walk out the door, have a breakfast, come back in, and then I feel like I start my real work day. Like I have to tackle projects or whatever. So I miss that kind of segue back and forth. I am about 45 minutes from a coffee shop. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And we kind of like it out here. Erica and I just got back we were driving around the east boards of Iceland. Beautiful, gorgeous area. And we're trying to figure out, do we want to build a vacation house out here? Like, and spend half the year out here and half the year in San Diego, because then we get our city fix when we're in San Diego, and we get our middle of nowhere peacefulness fix out here. Because it is magical to sit out in a hot tub and just watch the land, watch horses around, watch sheep, see the aurora borealis overhead. I mean, it's a beautiful, peaceful kind of thing. I can hear a car coming from kilometers, whatever it is that they use over here. But it is different, very different. Next up, Rayam says, can I ask some advice? Yes, absolutely. Okay. D Trouble says, I want to be there during COVID. Exactly. Everything's open. Restaurants are open. They just shut bars. They had a little small outbreak in Reykjavik. So they just closed bars, but restaurants are still open. They can still serve booze. Still open till like 8, 9, 10. And swimming pools just closed, but that doesn't bother me too much. Hot tub, so it's not such a big deal. But it's great to be out here during COVID. It's just phenomenal. So Rayam says, can I ask some advice since I'm a junior and I would like to expand my knowledge? What do you recommend for me learning or skills for juniors like me? Well, it's funny you mention it. My button for my sponsorship camera. Hold on a second here. This week, it just so happens that this week I have a sale going on for my live class season passes, my recorded class season passes, all that kind of stuff. So you can go over to camera, ta-da! You can go over to brentozar.com/go/happy20th. And from there, you can buy any of my training classes for 75% off. That sale ends Wednesday, so you have like 2 more days left to go and that. You can buy my Fundamentals series. My Fundamentals series is really where I would start for more junior folks, and then a Mastering series for expert level folks. If you don't have the budget to go buy that stuff, because a lot of people don't, and let's be honest, training is kind of expensive. If you don't have the budget to go and do that stuff, go to brentozar.com/go/books. brentozar.com/go/books. And I've got my book recommendations over there. The catch, of course, with books is, I don't know how you work with books, but the way that I know most people and how they work with books is that they buy them and they sit them on the shelf. And that's kind of the end of it. I know I stopped buying books. I had so many books piled up on the shelf that I wanted to read, and even the same thing with Kindles and whatnot. I just couldn't actually get this thing down. So that's the way that I would recommend doing it. Next up, let's go see here. So, oh, good, Bob Lobster. Good to see you. Very good to see you. Next up, we have Philip. So Philip says, thanks for answering the question about Hyperscale. Follow up. Based off your response, would you say the cloud overall is no good and shouldn't be considered for a multi-terabyte database? Where do you typically take your clients on this? Well, that's a really interesting question. SQL Constant Care, which is a monitoring application that we sell for SQL Server, like it's a software as a service type application, is a multi-terabyte database that is up in the cloud. It's just that it's in Amazon Aurora, which has dramatically faster write speeds and lower expenses than Azure SQL DB Hyperscale. I don't typically take my clients, the folks who have multi-terabyte databases, I don't take them to Azure SQL DB. I take them to, because with VMs, you get much more granular control over things like how the transaction log works, how bulk logging works, how your backup and recovery works, all kinds of stuff. So, and it's not to say that I'm dead set against it permanently. I believe that the architecture for Azure SQL DB Hyperscale is a beautiful architecture. It is a gorgeous way of the future. I'm so pumped about how that thing works. It's just they got to fix the storage throughput. You can't have Hyperscale as a name when the thing is slower than a USB thumb drive in terms of writes. That's catastrophic. Next up, Peter says, good morning, Brent. On a SQL Server, I'm receiving a lot of waits on execution pipe event internal over 2 minutes per minute. Hints where I can look at. Google. I don't remember that one off the top of my head. I have never seen that one before. So I would just Google it. Paul Randall and Kimberly Tripp have a wait stats library that's usually going to surface up to the top on your Google results. I'd start there in terms of your journey. The other thing is, you can look to see which queries are involved with the waits. You can run tools like SP Blitz Who, SP Who is active, and you can see which queries are waiting on which things. So then that'll help you start tracking down to which queries are involved. Next up, Raman says, can you please do some tutorial on Service Broker? No. Because if you're going to do queuing, I got a camera. If you're going to do queuing, you're an idiot to do it in SQL. SQL Server is expensive as all hell, like $2,000 a core for standard edition and $7,000 a core for enterprise edition. That's before you buy the hardware. If you want to do queuing, go look at Amazon Simple Queuing Service, SQS. Go look at any RabbitMQ. There's so many things that cost. Amazon Simple Queuing is pennies per hundreds of thousands or billions of messages. It's nothing. We run. Oh, good. Glad we did, Simo. It's nothing. We run SQL Constant Care with almost everything we do runs through Simple Queuing, and I want to say it costs us $10 a month. It's so cheap. So Service Broker is the kind of thing that Microsoft brought it out, hoping that people would adopt it. Smart people just looked at that and went, why the Sam hell would I pay thousands of dollars per CPU? Something that I can get for free. Doesn't make sense. It's not that it's a bad product. It's just why flush your money? If you want to flush your money down the toilet, I got a toilet at my house. Come on over. You can use my toilet. You can only use my toilet to flush money down it. And I'm going to put a colander in the bottom of the bowl before you start flushing and take your money, but at least you'll still have the same experience of flushing the toilet. And then the last question that we have was over here from Mark, because I'm only doing the questions that have 3 or more upvotes for this webcast. Every 3 weeks, the SQL Server needs a restart because of memory issues. Around 18 gigs of the memory are allocated by the buffer pool. That's not a leak. That's by design. That's the way SQL Server works. Whenever everything SQL Server does, not everything, but most of the things it does in 8K pages. So kind of think of them as like spreadsheet pages with your data in it. As your queries are running, SQL Server is caching these 8K data pages up in RAM so that it doesn't have to go back to disk. You want SQL Server to use all of the RAM that you have. That's why you gave it the RAM. If you don't want it to use the RAM, the hell did you give it the RAM for? If you only want it to use 4 gigs, give it 4 gigs. But otherwise, SQL Server says, left this here on the table. If no one else is going to use it, then I'm going to go ahead and use it. That's not a memory leak. That's by design. That's what you want. If you want to learn more about that, search for a sysadmin's guide to SQL Server memory. Admin's guide to SQL Server memory. It's a post that I wrote, 5-10 years ago, and it explains what SQL Server uses memory for and why that's desirable, why you don't want to restart SQL Server there. All right, so that is everything that I'm going to tackle through today. We've hit all the questions with 3 or more upvotes. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with me. I am now going to go drop out and go make myself some breakfast because I have to make my own breakfast here like some kind of peasant. Oh, my God. So thanks for hanging out with me this week. Remember, my classes are on sale. Switch over to the sponsor slide there. My classes are on sale this month, and the month is almost gone, so you still have a little bit of time left. If you go over to brentozar.com/go/happy20th, you can go over there and use that coupon code happy20th, and sales are open not just into the US, but also into the Europe and the United Kingdom now. Figured out how to go ahead and sell stuff out there as well. So thanks a lot, and I will see y'all later. Adios.